It was a quiet afternoon at the local gym. The smell of sweat, floor polish, and rubber mats filled the air. The sound of gloves hitting punching bags echoed through the open space. Everyone was going about their usual routine, lifting weights, stretching, and chatting in small groups. Near the corner, a man in a black martial arts uniform was finishing his training. He was known around the gym for his skill and discipline. People respected him. He had earned his black belt after years of hard work, and his confidence showed in the way he moved. Across the room, the custodian was doing his usual rounds, mopping the floor, wiping down mirrors, and collecting empty water bottles. He wasn't someone most people paid much attention to. He worked quietly, always polite, always doing his job without complaint. Some of the regulars would greet him with a nod or a smile. But beyond that, he stayed in the background that day. Something unexpected happened. The black belt had just finished a tough sparring session and was feeling playful. Maybe it was the energy in the air, or maybe he wanted to entertain the crowd a little. As the custodian walked by, pushing his cleaning cart, the black belt called out to him with a friendly grin. "Hey, you ever tried sparring before?" he asked, half joking. "Want to go a few rounds? Just for fun." The custodian paused. Everyone nearby turned to look. Some chuckled softly, assuming it was a joke. The idea of a trained fighter sparring with the janitor sounded funny to them, but the custodian didn't laugh. He simply set his mop aside, wiped his hands on a towel, and smiled. "Sure," he said calmly. "Why not?" The room went still. The black belt looked a little surprised but played along. "Really?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah," the custodian said, his voice even. "You said it's just for fun, right?" By now, a few people had stopped what they were doing. Someone leaned on a weight bench, curious. Others gathered near the mat, whispering and giggling. Nobody expected much. They thought it would be a quick, harmless exchange, something to laugh about later. As the custodian stepped onto the mat, he looked surprisingly composed. He didn't seem nervous or out of place. He stood straight, his eyes calm, breathing steady. The black belt noticed this and felt a tiny spark of curiosity. There was something different about the man's presence. "You sure about this?" the black belt asked again, just to be certain. "I'm sure," the custodian replied. "It's just a friendly spar after all." The trainer nearby decided to oversee the match, making sure everything stayed safe. "All right," he said. "Keep it light, no hard hits. Just movement and control." Both men nodded. The crowd grew a little bigger. Phones came out. A few people whispered comments like, "This will be over fast," or "Poor guy doesn't know what he's getting into." But the custodian didn't seem to hear any of it. He simply focused on his breathing. The black belt stretched his shoulders and got into position, confident and relaxed. He had done this hundreds of times before. To him, it was just a friendly round away to show skill without any pressure. But deep down, something about the custodian's calmness made him curious. Most people would laugh nervously or refuse the challenge. But this man didn't. There was no sign of fear in his eyes. The trainer raised his hand and said, "All right, begin." The two men faced each other. The air felt heavier now, like everyone could sense something different about this moment. It wasn't just a random match anymore. It felt like the start of a story that no one in that gym would forget. The black belt made the first small move, testing the distance, smiling politely. The custodian responded by shifting his weight slightly, his stance subtle yet confident. Someone from the crowd whispered, "Wait, does he actually know how to fight?" No one answered. Everyone just watched. In that moment, the custodian wasn't just the man who cleaned the floors. He was someone mysterious, someone with a calm strength that drew everyone's attention. The black belt smiled again, now feeling both playful and intrigued. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's see what you've got." And as they circled each other under the bright gym lights, the crowd leaned closer. None of them knew it yet, but they were about to witness something that would leave them completely speechless. The room had grown unusually quiet. Even the background music from the gym speakers seemed to fade. People who had come there to lift weights or run on the treadmill had stopped what they were doing. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the two men standing on the mat, the black belt fighter and the quiet custodian. At first, no one took it too seriously. A few people smiled, others whispered things like, "This will be over in seconds," or "He's going to regret saying yes." Most thought the custodian was just being polite, maybe trying to make the black belt feel good. But when the match began, the mood changed. The black belt moved first, just a light motion, like testing the waters. He didn't want to hurt anyone. It was only a friendly spar. He expected the custodian to freeze, maybe step back or laugh nervously. But instead, the custodian shifted his feet and avoided the move smoothly, almost effortlessly. It wasn't luck. His timing was too perfect for that. A few people blinked in surprise. Someone said softly, "Wait, did you see that?" The black belt adjusted his stance and tried again, a little faster this time. The custodian reacted before the move even fully came, his eyes focused, his posture calm. He didn't strike back, but the way he moved showed he understood exactly what was happening. His balance, his control was something you only saw in people who'd trained before. The crowd began to whisper. The trainer, watching from the side, folded his arms, a small smile forming on his face. "He's not just cleaning floors," he muttered quietly. The black belt paused, slightly raising an eyebrow. He wasn't angry, but he was curious now. He gave a friendly smile and said, "You've done this before, haven't you?" The custodian smiled faintly but didn't answer. He just took a small breath and waited for the next move. That only made everyone more curious. Who was this guy? The next round started. The black belt stepped in faster, using a bit more energy this time, but again. The custodian flowed like water, sidestepping neatly, keeping perfect distance. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't showy. It was quiet, skill-controlled, focused, and natural. The people watching started leaning forward, forgetting their own workouts. Phones were still out, but now nobody was laughing. They were amazed. One woman near the front whispered, "He's actually really good." The trainer nodded slowly. "He knows what he's doing. Look at his footwork, he's done this before." Black belt, now breathing a little heavier, realized he had underestimated the man in front of him. But instead of frustration, a spark of respect appeared in his eyes. He took a step back and nodded lightly, almost like acknowledging a worthy opponent. "You move well," he said, still smiling. The custodian gave a humble shrug. "Just keeping up," he replied softly. The crowd chuckled, but it wasn't mockery this time, it was admiration. The mood had completely changed. What started as a joke had turned into something inspiring. They continued to move around the mat, both focused, both careful. The black belt tried to test the custodian's rhythm, but every time he thought he had him, the custodian reacted just in time. It was like he could see the moves before they came. No one had expected this. The black belt finally lowered his hands for a moment and said with a laugh, "All right, I see you." The custodian smiled back, still calm, still modest. "It's just practice," he said simply. And in that short exchange, those few words, something shifted in the room. The crowd didn't see a black belt and a janitor anymore. They saw two people, both skilled, both respectful. Sharing a moment built on mutual understanding, the match ended with a light tap on the shoulder. No winner, no loser. Just two men who had quietly earned each other's respect. The audience clapped softly. It wasn't wild cheering. It was more like appreciation. They knew they'd witnessed something rare, a moment that reminded everyone not to judge by appearances. The black belt offered his hand. The custodian shook it firmly, then gave a polite nod and stepped off the mat. He picked up his cleaning towel again, ready to return to work as if nothing had happened. But the people who saw it knew this wasn't something they would forget soon. They looked at him differently now. The man who mopped the floors had just shown them all what quiet confidence and true discipline looked like, and as the trainer called out for the next sparring session, the air still buzzed with energy. People were whispering, smiling, still amazed at what they had seen. Some moments in life don't need medals or trophies, they just need truth. And that day, inside that small gym, everyone had seen it. The moment the trainer said, "Continue," everyone held their breath again. No one wanted to miss what would happen next. The room had gone from casual gym chatter to complete silence. You could almost hear hearts beating as the two men faced each other again under the bright lights. The black belt adjusted his stance, this time with more focus. He wasn't being playful anymore. He wasn't trying to show off or make a joke. What started as fun had now become something deeper, a test of skill, maybe even of respect. The custodian stood across from him, still calm, still quiet. His posture was relaxed but steady, like someone who had done this many times before. His eyes stayed on the black belt, not aggressive, but aware, like he was reading every move before it happened. The trainer gave a nod, and they began again. The black belt moved first, faster this time. His steps were sharp, his timing precise. But just as before, the custodian flowed with him, dodging, stepping aside, moving like the rhythm of a slow, practiced dance. People watching started whispering again. How does he move like that? Someone said, it's like he's done this his whole life. One man recording the match lowered his phone for a second, eyes wide. This isn't luck, he said quietly. He's trained. The black belt tried a quick combination, but the custodian countered not with power, but with timing and balance. He didn't push, didn't strike hard, just redirected the energy smoothly. The crowd gasped softly when the black belt stumbled a step to the side, catching himself before he could fall. The custodian immediately stepped back, raising his hand slightly as if to say, "You okay?" That small gesture spoke louder than any words. There was no arrogance, no show-off attitude, just respect and control. The black belt nodded, breathing heavier now. He was surprised but also impressed. "You've done this before," he said between breaths. The custodian smiled a little and shook his head gently. "A long time ago?" he said quietly. The trainer on the side tilted his head. "You used to train?" he asked curiously. The custodian looked around, noticing all the faces staring at him. For a second, he seemed shy, like he didn't want to talk about it. But then he nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said softly. "I used to teach. But that was years ago." A wave of surprise went through the crowd. People who had seen him every day pushing a mop or fixing machines were now realizing they had no idea who he really was. "You taught martial arts?" someone asked from the back. The custodian smiled humbly. "I did. Life got busy and I stopped. But it never really leaves you, you know?" The black belt smiled, his respect now clear. "Well," he said, with a small bow, "it shows." The two men shared a moment of quiet understanding. It wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about connection, one man recognizing the skill and humility of another. Someone in the audience clapped softly. Then another followed. Soon, the small gym was filled with gentle applause. Not wild cheering, not loud shouting, just sincere appreciation. The custodian bowed slightly and stepped back. "That's enough for me," he said, picking up his towel again. "I should get back to work." But nobody saw him the same way anymore. The people who once passed him by without a second look now watched him walk away in silence. The man who had always been in the background had just become the most respected person in the room. The trainer approached the black belt and smiled. "That's the beauty of this sport," he said softly. "You never know who carries wisdom until you stop and look." The black belt nodded slowly. "I learned something today," he said, glancing toward the custodian who was already back to wiping down the floor. "Real strength doesn't always wear a belt." The crowd began to disperse, but the story of what they'd seen stayed with them. People whispered as they left about the quiet custodian who once taught martial arts, who carried himself with grace and dignity, even when no one was watching. That short spar wasn't just a match, it was a reminder that humility and confidence can live in the same heart. The man with the mop had shown everyone what true mastery looked like, not in power or pride, but in calm control and quiet respect, as the evening light came through the gym windows. The custodian pushed his cart down the hallway, the faint echo of applause still in the air. He smiled to himself, not because he had impressed anyone, but because he had been reminded of who he once was and who he still could be. Sometimes, life doesn't take away what you've learned. It just hides it until the right moment brings it back. And for everyone in that gym, that moment had just unfolded right before their eyes. The gym had started to settle down again. But the air still carried a strange mix of silence and wonder. The spar was over, yet people were still talking about it in small groups. Some replayed the moment on their phones, showing it to others who had missed it. Others just stood there, shaking their heads in disbelief. The black belt sat on the edge of the mat, still catching his breath. He wasn't upset, not even embarrassed. In fact, there was a small, genuine smile on his face, the kind that comes when you've just learned something important. The custodian was back to his routine, wiping the mirrors and collecting towels as if nothing had happened. But everyone's eyes followed him now. There was quiet respect in the room. No one saw him as just the janitor anymore. After a few minutes, the black belt walked up to him, holding his water bottle. "Hey," he said softly. "That was amazing. You didn't just know the moves, you understood them." The custodian looked up and gave a humble smile. "Old habits," he said quietly. "Did you really teach before?" The black belt asked, curious. The custodian paused for a second, then nodded. "Yeah, I had my own small studio years ago. It wasn't fancy, but it was home. I taught kids, adults, whoever wanted to learn. It was a good time." The black belt leaned against the wall, listening carefully. The custodian's voice had a warmth to it, nostalgic but peaceful. "What happened?" the black belt asked gently. The custodian smiled, though there was a touch of sadness behind it. "Life happened," he said simply. "The studio closed down when I had to take care of my family. Bills piled up and I couldn't keep it open. I took whatever work I could find. That's how I ended up here." He said it without bitterness, without complaint. It was just the truth, plain and honest. The black belt nodded slowly. "That must have been hard." The custodian shrugged lightly. "It was, at first, but I don't regret it. I still get to be around people. Still get to see the same energy, the same spirit. Sometimes when I clean the mats, I remember those old days and smile. Not everything is lost." Now the black belt looked down, clearly moved. "You never stopped being a teacher," he said quietly. "Even today, you taught everyone here something." The custodian laughed softly. "Maybe," he said, "but I didn't plan it. I was just trying to be polite when you asked to spar." By now, a few people nearby had stopped to listen. The atmosphere had turned warm, almost emotional. There was something deeply human about the moment, two men talking, not as fighter and janitor, but as equals. The trainer walked over, smiling. "You know," he said to the custodian, "we could use someone like you here. Not to Clint to help teach. If you ever feel like showing the younger ones a few lessons, the door's open." The custodian looked surprised. "Oh no, I can't. I wouldn't want to step on anyone's toes." The trainer shook his head. "You wouldn't. You'd inspire them." There was a pause. For a moment, the custodian didn't know what to say. His eyes softened, and you could see that something inside him had been touched, something that had been sleeping for a long time. "I'll think about it," he said finally. The black belt smiled and patted him on the shoulder. "You should. People can learn a lot from someone like you." The custodian nodded, smiling faintly, then went back to his work. But there was a small light in his eyes now, one that hadn't been there before. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was beside a quiet satisfaction of being seen for who he truly was, as the crowd slowly thinned out. The custodian stayed behind to finish his shift. The gym grew quieter, with only the sound of the mop gliding across the floor. But this time, it didn't feel like work. It felt like he was polishing a part of his own past, making it shine again. Before leaving, the black belt turned back one last time. The custodian was still working, humming softly to himself. The fighter smiled, whispered a quiet thank you, and walked out. Outside, the evening sun painted the sky in warm colors, the same kind of glow that filled the gym a few minutes earlier. Inside, the custodian stood for a moment, leaning on his mop, lost in thought. He didn't need applause or recognition. All he needed was that small spark that reminded him his story wasn't over, and for the first time in years, He felt that same fire inside him that had once pushed him to teach, to train, to believe. Maybe tomorrow would be just another day at work. Or maybe it would be the start of something new. The next morning, the gym felt different. The same weights, the same machines, the same smell of sweat and determination, but something in the air had changed. People looked around, almost expecting to see the custodian before they even started their workouts. When he finally walked in, pushing his cart as usual, a few members smiled and greeted him warmly. Some even clapped him on the back, saying, "Good morning, champ," with a laugh. It wasn't teasing, it was respect. The custodian smiled shyly, not used to this kind of attention. He just nodded politely and got to work, mopping the same floors, wiping the same mirrors. But this time, every small task felt lighter, easier. For the first time in years, he felt seen. The black belt came in later that morning. When he spotted the custodian across the room, he waved. The two shared a quick smile, the kind that comes from mutual respect. No words were needed. They both remembered what had happened the day before. As the day went on, more people came to talk to the custodian. Some asked questions about his training days. Others just wanted to thank him for inspiring them. One young man, barely in his teens, approached shyly and said, "Sir, do you think you could show me how to move like you did yesterday?" The custodian laughed softly. "You mean how to dodge without tripping over yourself?" He joked. The boy grinned. "Yeah, exactly that." The custodian thought for a moment. Then he set his mop aside, motioned the boy toward the mat, and began showing him a few simple moves. Step, shift, balance. Nothing fancy, just the basics. But as he moved, his body remembered everything. The rhythm, the posture, the control. It was like opening an old book he had once loved. Before long, a few others gathered to watch. The black belt joined in too, smiling as he saw the custodian teaching again. "Looks like you never really stopped," the black belt said. The custodian smiled, a little surprised by how natural it felt. "Maybe I just needed the right reason to start again." The trainer saw what was happening and walked over. "You know," he said with a grin, "I meant what I said yesterday. If you're willing, we could use your help here. A few hours a week, maybe teach some basics. Nothing too heavy." The custodian looked at him, unsure. "You really think people would want to learn from me?" The trainer laughed. "After what everyone saw yesterday, I think you already have students waiting." The custodian looked around. The faces watching him weren't laughing, they were eager, curious, full of respect. For the first time in a long time, he felt like his purpose had returned. He nodded slowly. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's give it a try." That simple decision changed everything over the next few weeks. The gym began holding short evening sessions where the custodian taught balance, breathing, and basic martial arts movements. His style was different, gentle, but firm, more focused on discipline and respect than on competition. People loved it. Even those who never planned to fight came just to learn from his calm approach. He didn't talk much about his past, and no one pushed him to. It wasn't about who he used to beat, it was about what he was giving now. One evening, after a small class, the black belt stayed behind. He watched the custodian pack up the mats and said softly, "You know, I think you've reminded all of us what real strength looks like." The custodian looked up, curious. "And what's that?" The black belt smiled. "It's not in the punches or the kicks. It's in the patience. In the way you carry yourself when no one's watching." The custodian nodded slowly. "Maybe strength isn't something you show," he said. "Maybe it's something you live." The two shook hands again, the same way they had after their spar. But this time, it wasn't about a match. It was about understanding. That night, as the gym lights dimmed and the sound of closing doors echoed, the custodian stayed back for a moment. He looked at the empty mats, the quiet room, the soft hum of the air conditioner. A small smile appeared on his face. He didn't need medals, trophies, or recognition. All he needed was the peace that came from doing what he loved and helping others grow. As he picked up his cleaning cart and headed for the exit, the reflection in the gym mirror caught his eye. For a second, he didn't see the man with a mop. He saw the teacher he used to be. The spark, the confidence, the purpose, it was all still there. He turned off the lights, stepped outside, and felt the cool night air on his face. The street was quiet, the stars faint but visible. He took a deep breath and whispered to himself, "It's never too late to start again," somewhere inside that small-town gym. His story of humility, respect, and rediscovered purpose would be told again and again by those who saw it. Because sometimes, the most powerful lessons don't come from those who shout the loudest, but from those who live their truth quietly, one small act at a time.